It's London's top job. Joining me, candidates from the four largest parties, each hoping to be the one to lead this city. They're all promising to improve the lives of Londoners. So how can they? And will anyone here convince you they can deliver what Londoners really need?
London.
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 The city I love.
We've been electing a new mayor every 4 years since 2000.
But last year's elections were postponed because of COVID.
The mayor is meant to be working for you.
And me.
With a budget of £19 billion.
It's money to be spent on improving
Crime on the streets.
Our transport system.
Housing.
To promote the city's vibrant economy.
Protect our environment.
And to invest in our youth.
We need a mayor that speaks for us.
In times of crisis.
And celebration.
We need a mayor that will fight
Against inequality.
Social injustices.
For businesses, no matter our size.
To make this city
The best it can be.
Is that you?
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 Hello and a very warm welcome to the programme. You just heard from our panel of undecided Londoners. With me to answer some of their questions, mayoral candidates from the four largest parties. Labour's Sadiq Khan, Conservative candidate Shaun Bailey, from the Green Party Shaun, and for the Liberal Democrats Luisa Porritt. And feel free, of course, to get involved on social media using the hashtag BBC London. A lot to get through, so let's go straight to our first question from Christian Douglas, who runs a youth mentoring project in Croydon. Chris, what do you want to know?
Well, I'm a youth worker with unique talent. I want to know, I've seen knife crime become out of control and children die on our streets. What are you going to do to overcome knife crime in London? OK,
Shaun Bailey, what do you say to Chris?
I think what I'd say, Chris, is thank you for the question. And firstly, that's one of the biggest areas that Londoners have been failed in. We've had a 60% rise in knife crime. And I remember one of the first acts that Sadiq Khan did as mayor was to take £38 million out of the police staffing budget, which meant we'd have a record low number of police officers on the street. And we've seen now what that's led to. I think the other thing as well is to make sure that we give young people somewhere to be. So I'm going to start by opening 32 youth zones across London and recruiting 4,000 new youth workers as well. And because I want people to understand there's three ends. We get the youth safe, we get them in positive places, but also we get the policing right as well. So we're getting 8,000 extra police officers onto the streets, and most importantly, getting them to patrol, make sure they don't over-police, but they make London safe. It's important that we boost confidence in the police, because that's the only way that the streets of London will be safe.
And are those extra officers that you talk about, is that including the around 5,000 that the Met would get anyway as their share of the government's nationwide pledge?
Yes, and we topped them up with 3,000. The problem we've had in City Hall is we've spent money on press officers, we spent money on bicycle ballet, but we haven't spent money on Londoners' safety. OK,
to Sadiq Khan.
Well, Chris, what you've heard is a good response to a really serious issue. Both as an MP and as a mayor, I meet bereaved families who suffer the consequences of the serious youth violence you've talked about that started going up in 2013. And the reason why serious youth violence and violent crime has gone up is because of the cuts. Cuts have consequences. Over the last 10, 11 years, we've seen cuts in police, cuts in youth services. Shaun did an excellent report as an assembly member, which documented all the youth clubs closed down over the last 11 years, all the youth workers lost their jobs, and all the young people without constructive things to do. So what I've done over the last 5 years, Chris, and I'm going to build on this, is invest, yes, in police, more than 1,000 extra police officers since I became mayor, but also in giving young people constructive things to do. So we've already invested £70 million in a Young Londoners Fund, more than 300 youth clubs given the funding, more than 110,000 young people given constructive things to do. That's a start. We've got to build on that. So in my second term, my mantra is jobs, jobs, jobs. Every young person to have a mentor and a good quality youth club near them. We need more coaches, more mentors, more role models. Chris, I'm sure you're one in Croydon. I've seen the good work taking place in Croydon. I'm going to build on that should I be re-elected.
Sadiq Khan, overall knife crime did go up under your watch.
That's not true. So knife crime began rising in 2013. In the last 5 years, youth violence has gone down, knife crimes under 25 has gone down, burglary's gone down, moped-enabled crime's gone down, gun crime's gone down, homicide's gone down. I'm not complacent. One breed family is one breed family too many. These are people we're talking about. I want to give young people the skills, the aspiration and the hope to have those potentials fulfilled.
OK, let me ask Chris, what do you make of what you've heard so far?
It's fantastic and it's encouraging, but many charities face inconsistent funding, cuts, which means young people get inconsistent services. And in many cases, they get mentors dipping in and dipping out of their life. That is not good enough. If we're going to have these services, they have to be consistent. How will you ensure that?
Okay.
Chris, can I deal with that? Chris raised a really point. Chris, what I've done is, you're right. So I've given 3-year contracts to these youth services because we can't have this temporary ad hoc funding. Who'd want a job that could be lost in 6 months' time?
OK, Sadiq
Khan, that's why we're giving 3-year guaranteed funding.
Shaun,
I think what Sadiq Khan said just then was a good example of the constructive way the Greens have worked on the London Assembly. It was the work that I've done 4 or 5 years since being elected as a result of listening to young people who were saying their youth services were disappearing. Shaun talked about 32 new youth centres. The cuts to youth centres, we've lost more than 100 under austerity. And I will talk about austerity because I'm from the party that was calling out austerity as a mistake from the start, that said that this would cause real harm. In 2015, my party stood alone when all 3 of these other parties were saying the cuts should continue. We want to invest in transforming London into somewhere that's genuinely healthy as a society, somewhere where young people can genuinely thrive and where we're investing in a society where violence can't thrive. This is a very important principle here. You can't just enforce your way out of violence. You have to build a healthier society and transform the city. That's what Greens are all about.
And Shaun, just very briefly, you said you're also the party that would like to see 0 murders. I think we'd all like to see that, but is it really realistic?
I think it's incredibly important to set that as your target, to measure your progress against that. And when you are looking at how you're doing against having no murders at all, what you're achieving is a really preventative approach. It means less violence on the streets, it means fewer people in hospital, it means people knowing where they can go to get help at a time that makes a difference. These services that people can go to that are genuinely preventive have been cut across the board. It isn't just youth services. Okay. And my target would underpin a completely new approach.
OK. Let me bring in Luisa Porritt there. A completely different approach. 0 murders.
Well, I just want to first of all thank Chris for raising this important and serious topic. We need to be investing in our young people. There's no easy way around this. So what I would do as Mayor is create a London Youth Service to coordinate after-school activities for young people, make sure that that is joined up across London because it isn't enough at the moment. I would also create a London Apprenticeships Hub to make sure that young people have the work opportunities that they need. Because only 8% of London businesses currently employ an apprentice. So this is a great way of making sure that young people can kickstart their careers and that they have the opportunities they need so that criminal gangs can't prey on vulnerable young people and bring them into a life of crime. So prevention is absolutely key. We know that the underlying drivers of what's been happening are things like poverty, lack of hope, lack of opportunity for young people. But also, I would invest in community policing. We need to return to proper community policing in our capital. So I double the number of dedicated neighbourhoods officers all across London.
And how would you pay for all of that? Would you also raise council tax to pay for police officers?
Well, there is more money coming from the government, and I think the crucial thing is what's the mayor going to do with that money? How are they going to allocate it? And that's why I would focus resources on increasing neighbourhood policing, because actually when the police are embedded in the local communities that they serve, they're known and trusted by local people, and they're better able to do their jobs, and that means that they can help prevent crime, they can also investigate it more quickly. But ultimately, the Met is a multi-billion-pound budget, so it's about priorities and where you spend that money.
And on that note of trust, and you talk about policing, let me just bring in Zoe Firth from Enfield, who works with a project to help prevent gender-based violence. Zoe, what's your question?
So I work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, and I see the destructive impact caused by this violence every day. So apart from increasing policing, what are you going to invest in to prevent gender-based violence?
OK, Luisa Porritt, we'll pick up back with you. What is the one big thing you'll change to achieve what Zoe wants to see?
Well, Zoe, thank you for raising this as well. It's a topic close to my heart as a young female Londoner. The tragic death of Sarah Everard is something that moved all of us and reminded us of the daily threats that women face in our capital and, frankly, all over our society all the time. There isn't an easy fix to this either. We need to root out misogyny from our society, and there isn't just one way to do that. We need to educate boys from a young age to treat women equally and with respect. But we also need to make sure that when something happens to women, that they are believed, that they are taken seriously at every stage of the process, from when they report to the police to going into court.
OK, Shaun, one preventative measure that would help what Zoe's saying.
So we need to have a big conversation about changing society away from regarding women as people that can be abused, people who could be shouted at on the street, and a lot of our murders are domestic murders. And I just want to say, I've talked a lot about services, but the real preventive service for violence against women and girls is the housing service. At the moment, people do not have the ability to get away from a home where they feel like they're in danger, and that's something I massively want to fix.
Zoe, I'm going to bring you back in again because Sadiq Khan is sitting here. He's been the mayor for 5 years. Do you think enough has been done? And what's the one thing you want to see him here today pledge that he will do if he's re-elected?
Hi, yes. So I think a really great point was brought up earlier by Chris, which is consistency in funding, seeing longer term contracts for funding to services, frontline services like shelters and refuges. We're seeing record levels of sexual harassment amongst young people at the moment, but they're also our greatest avenue for actually stopping this violence as and when it begins. Okay. So making this conversation more concrete by talking about how we'll invest in some of these services is what I'd really like to see.
OK. Sadiq Khan, something concrete.
Yeah, well, can I say first I agree with what you said and also with what Louisa and Shaun said as well. Over the last 5 years, for the reasons you've said, we've invested record sums, £61 million, to support those who are victims, girls and women, of violence. So, for example, we've given funding, long-term funding, to refugees and accommodation for women fleeing domestic abuse, domestic violence. Secondly, the survivor groups are so important. When I discovered there was a 1-year waiting list for rape victims, I immediately last year increased their funding by 1.5 million. And the third part of that stool, the third leg, is targeting the behaviour of perpetrators, male perpetrators who reoffend. I'll say this, though. The elephant in the room is the misogynistic culture that exists in our society. And that's perpetuated by some of the comments by Shaun Bailey and other men about their views of girls and women. So what I do as a first is to make sure the government keeps its promise to make misogyny a hate crime. I think this is a start, because making misogyny a hate crime will make sure the police take it seriously and will make sure boys understand the way they treat girls is important. It must be with respect, and if they don't, they'll be called out.
OK, you've made your point. Shaun Bailey, respond to that, please.
Firstly, I'd say, so of course what the mayor has done has been very ineffective, because you've seen those rise in those numbers. I think the focus here would be threefold. Firstly, we have to change the culture of the police. As Shaun said, that women are believed, they are protected. There's large parts of our transport network that are just devoid of any cameras, devoid of any sort of policing, and women are regularly attacked on there. So our pledge to cover those places like the Central Line. There's been a 44% increase in sexual attacks on the network. We need to get on top of that. The second part, of course, as well, is about the youth work network. When I put 4,000 youth workers out into London, out to other projects, we can use those youth workers to talk to young people about what is appropriate. I used to run a underage pregnancy unit, and what was interesting in the project was the girls refused to come. They forced me to go and speak to the boys, and that was a great learning for me that I then maximise across all the youth work we have. If we're going to change the culture around this, we need to first get someone to take responsibility. That's been sorely lacking in City Hall, and then speak to our young people so the culture changes, and also the police as well.
OK, Shaun Bailey, very briefly, are you going to have a job persuading people like Zoe when under the Conservative government, you have to admit, many services were closed? I think the Charity Refuge says services have been cut to the bone and they may not be able to be sustainable.
Well, Shaun was the advisor who advised us in 2010.
I'd say two things about that. When I'm Mayor of London, I absolutely will commit to these services, because I think it's the way you get things done by using the third-party charities. They have much more understanding and a longevity to do the work. I ran a charity myself. I understand why you need a long-term contract funding, because it's about people, good people.
Okay.
They need to be secure to do the job properly as well. But also, it's about what we do from City Hall. City Hall has become a place where we do lots of PR, lots of great talks, but no impact, no action.
We must move on, but before we do, at this point, let me just remind you of the full list of candidates standing to become Mayor of London, and you can watch interviews with all of them on the BBC London website. We are going to move on to housing, and before we do, let's hear the experience of Pascal Mitchell, a librarian from Bermondsey. Pascal, tell us your situation briefly.
There's 6 of us living in a 3-bedroom flat, so we've been sharing our overcrowded flat for the period of COVID, and also two of my children have disabilities, so it's quite a difficult situation, and we're on a waiting list with 14,000 other people, so it's quite hard to get a bigger flat.
Okay, Pascal, thank you for that. And just to be completely transparent, Pascal has been in the past a member of the Labour Party and also has campaigned for the Lib Dems, but like the rest of the panel, is undecided at the moment. Shaun, in your last manifesto, you had a target of 50,000 homes to be built a year. You know, this time, no longer have a target. Why?
We have to follow the targets set by the needs of Londoners. And so the target at the moment that's in the current London plan is 64,000 homes a year, isn't it? It's gone up. Nothing has been done in the last 5 years that's really closed that gap between the needs of Londoners, that target of 64,000 homes, and what's actually being built.
So for people like Pascal
a massive
and many Londoners, what are you going to do? What can you do?
We have to make much better use of London's land, and we cannot have, as I'm afraid there is at the moment, £500 million of the grants that have come from government sitting idle in the GLA's bank accounts. I would get that money out there, buying homes that already exist from the market, the ones that are not being sold to the foreign investors as much anymore. Let's get those off the developers and let's get them onto the housing allocations, into the housing associations, into the councils, and helping to bridge that gap. And we have to be using the public land better as well and getting more community-led housing built as well. We can't rely only on the big developers. We've been trying that through the housing market for the past 15, 20 years, and it isn't getting us anywhere. Meanwhile, renters like me, people like Pascal, are living in homes they can't really afford, that are overcrowded, and there's not enough being done about it. We need a mayor who's really just going to use every single lever that we have, not just building more homes, but dealing with the homes that already exist in London, and getting the powers to control things like rents, to control things like evictions, because the government has been incredibly slow on this.
And what about living in empty office spaces? Because that's what you're suggesting, Luisa Porritt.
Well, I thank you, Pascal, for raising your situation, and I really empathise with it, because I am a councillor in Camden and I deal with individuals and families like yours all the time who are in overcrowded accommodation, and that's why we can't have more of the same. It hasn't worked. The current mayor has only started half of the affordable homes that he promised he would deliver over his term. And so we need to change our approach. What the government's been doing hasn't worked either. So what I would do is set up a London housing company, a City Hall-backed developer, to really take charge of this process and make sure we're delivering the homes that Londoners desperately need. There is no substitute for increasing the supply of housing. So I would do things like converting some of the empty office space that we know is coming onto the market into quality, affordable homes.
There are some concerns, though, that where that's happened before, that these sorts of conversions can result in small and poor quality homes.
That's why I would set up the London Housing Company, to make sure that these are quality properties and to steer that process. It's been done in Rotterdam, actually, by a Labour mayor, so we know that we can do it here too. It's not really been tried in London, and I think we should be the pioneers of a fresh approach.
Sadiq Khan, you have failed to build the number of homes in your 2016 manifesto, which you said were needed. 50,000 a year was quoted, but you built 35,000 last year.
Well, Pascal, I don't just empathise with what you're going through. I've experienced it. I'm one of 8 kids who mum and dad lived in a 3-bedroom council flat in the 70s. The difference was in the 70s, councils were building the homes that people like you desperately need. What's happened over the last few years is the government has failed, successive governments, to build the numbers of homes we need in London that are genuinely affordable, not for foreigners to use as gold bricks to invest in. So let me tell you what I've done over the last 5 years as Mayor. I ditched the dodgy definition of what Shaun's friend Boris Johnson thinks an affordable home is. A home costing £500,000 to buy, or a home that has 80% of market value to rent. I threw it in the bin. For me, an affordable home is one of three things: a council home, and afford that you can rent; a home that's a London living rent, a third of average earnings; or a home that's shared ownership, part rent, part buy, with a deposit of £5,000. And here's what I've done. Last year, we broke the record for the most numbers of council homes begun since 1983. The year before we broke the record, the most starts since 1984. In the last year of Boris Johnson being mayor, only 3 homes where a social rent were payable started. 3. Last year, more than 7,000. Last year, Riz,
so you were talking about
last year we began building more than 17,000.
Not completions, though.
Well, yeah,
whichever way you measure it, you know, you haven't built enough homes.
No, we are breaking all records. No mayor's built more than me, but it'll take time. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
But you've also had record-breaking grants from the government to deliver homes.
Here's the good news.
You have had record-breaking grants.
Here's the good news. Because I'm standing up for London, I've negotiated from the government a grant of £4 billion going forward, which will mean 82,000 homes started. But the deal I've negotiated, I'm not sure if somebody...
But what about the £5 billion you've had in the last 5 years?
The deal I've negotiated means those homes, Pascal, will be genuinely affordable for you. And here's the other point. We've made sure, to answer your question, they're homes fit for families with affordable rents, because the alternative was family homes that only the very rich can afford. A market value home is no good to your family.
Yeah, so
you need a home that's social rent, and that's what I'm doing.
The numbers that Sadiq is giving there, though, are gross numbers, not net numbers. And we have to remember there is far too much demolition going on of existing council homes in London.
No, but
so we aren't seeing a net gain.
Shaun Bailey.
The point needs to be made here. If there's any area that London needs a fresh start, this is it. Your situation is dire because you need a bigger space. I was homeless all through my 20s in London.
What are you going to do?
Here's the point. I was homeless all my 20s through London, surfing around, and nobody could provide me with the type of home I need. The mayor has removed the target for family homes, which makes it almost impossible to get the kind of home you need. That's why it's important.
You won't believe we've had a Tory government for 11 years and a Tory mayor for 8 years. 3 social rent homes this last year.
You've had 5 years.
Zero council.
Look,
zero
the
council
mayor
homes
is interrupting.
in 8 years.
Sadiq Khan's interrupting because he doesn't want to face the truth. He's
well, we know leopards don't change
failed.
their spots. That's the issue.
He had a record amount of money and a record amount of time, and he failed massively. We need to move in a new direction. Shaun talked about over-reliance on big developers. Of course, those things have happened. That's why you need to set up a separate City Hall-backed developer that has no target except to deliver homes for Londoners. That's what I will do.
No targets from Shaun Bailey. He's just...
Louisa
you heard him loud and clear.
Well. I will build
100,000
homes for £100,000 because that gets Londoners on the housing market, gets people what they want. It's not just my dream. 87% of Londoners want to own their own home.
Shaun
if the
Bailey,
mayor can't help with that, then he should step aside and let somebody who can do it.
So you're saying 100,000 homes at £100,000 each, so effectively shared ownership, which would need a £5,000 deposit. Won't that rule out Londoners on low income?
No, because you build other homes that need to happen as well. And Louisa made the point, there's no substitute for volume. We need to get the volume into market so people who rent like Shaun can move out of renting if they want to. People who
rent controls.
We don't rent controls.
Absolutely
is an admission that you cannot supply the housing you need. Rent controls everywhere else in the world has led to poor quality housing and less of it as well.
It's led to lower rents.
It's led to less housing for everybody.
Significantly lower rents than we have here.
Well, rent controls don't work because they'll only the current generation can benefit from that. But then the next generation are going to be consigned to more of the same.
Let me just bring Pascal back in here. Pascal, does anything you've heard there give you cause for optimism?
It would be great to invest in the community rather than investing in developers. Really, I think it's really important that people are able to stay in their communities. I don't think my children will be able to stay near us. As they grow up, they'll have to move out of the city, as are many of our key workers, because we can't afford to live in London. And it's such a shame because we love London.
OK, Pascal, we hear you, and thank you very much indeed for that. We wish you well. On to our next question, which comes from Mo Bello, an accessories designer from Mill Hill. She runs her own small business, and Mo, your question is?
I'm the creative director for a fashion label, Mo Queen. Now, small businesses like mine have been impacted by COVID-19. If elected, what type of support would you be able to provide to help small businesses recover?
Sadiq Khan.
Well, we're a city of small businesses. More than half of Londoners work for a small business. What I've done is I've set up the London Recovery Board with others across London, London councils, business people, small and big, public services and others. We've got 9 missions, and one of those is supporting people like you who run a small business as we recover from this awful pandemic. So what we've got is £32 million set aside to give young Londoners the skills for the future-proof jobs that you're creating. Really important. So there's a pipeline of talent to get the jobs that you create. What we're also doing is we've set up a scheme where we give small businesses capital. Often, particularly if you're a woman, if you're an ethnic minority, the banks don't give you the investment you need to expand. So we've got £100 million set aside to help small businesses like you. But the third part of the work we're doing to help small businesses is to export overseas. The Mayor's International Business Programme, we have a number of trade missions overseas. We've been to North America, China, India, Europe and elsewhere. And we hook you up, not just with other businesses across the globe, but venture capitalists, angel capitalists, help you expand and export the things you make overseas.
Shaun Bailey?
I think there's 2 things that we want to focus on. Firstly, I have a Deputy Mayor for Business and a Deputy Mayor for International Trade. I think it's important that the Deputy Mayor for Business does 2 things. Make sure we relay to the government the changes we need. If small businesses need their costs to be lowered so they can survive that period where they try to grow. The other thing that's interesting in London, we have such big finance here, but that never comes down to the level of small business. So small business can get some of that finance to expand as well. So we create a forum where business and small business can meet, where that finance can meet to push your idea, to have your idea backed so it can grow. And particularly for ethnic businesses and women as well, those businesses seem to find it even harder. So we'll have a particular push around that. But the real failing here has been that under current mayor, we've let London's high streets fall to the 5th lowest, 5% of footfall. We're so low compared to other parts of the country, and London is a footfall city. It doesn't matter if you sell coffee or you sell insurance, you need customers. So it'd be about making sure we keep London COVID clear, and we make sure we get people back into the centre of London, back into using your businesses and buying your products.
COVID recovery is going to take resource and support from government, whichever way you look at it. So, Shaun Bailey, do you think you will get a better deal for Londoners because you have a better relationship with government? When was the last time you spoke to the Chancellor, who is the person with the purse strings?
Actually, quite recently, but look, there's 2 things here, isn't it? Firstly, I think the Mayor has broken the trust with the government and civil servants. He's done so many things like tweeting.
I'm talking about your relationship.
Yeah, but this is the point, isn't it? He tweeted something after a Cobra meeting. What I want to do is rebuild that trust. There's a big difference of fighting with the government and fighting for London. I want to fight for London. I do believe I can get a good deal for London because the trust is there and we can build on that trust.
Sadiq Khan, do you have a constructive relationship when you use language like the most anti-London government in recent history in your manifesto? That's not going to help, is it?
What London has won is a mayor standing up for our city, sometimes working closely with the government when it's in London's interest to do so, but other times standing up to the government where they're getting it wrong. The government's got it wrong with the business rates increase that must be affecting you. The government's got it wrong with the lack of support for young people. I will say boo to a goose. I'm not in Boris Johnson's pocket. If you want a yes man, don't vote for me. Vote for Shaun. If you want somebody who's going to stand up to the government, work with them when it's in our interest to do so, but stand up to them when it's not, vote for me.
Briefly, are you in the pocket of the Prime Minister?
If you're going to fight with the civil service, you're going to fight with the government, you won't get a deal. It looks good to say you're fighting for the government. What are you doing? You're fighting with the government. What Londoners want is someone who delivers for them, not someone who delivers for themselves. OK,
Shaun Berry, how will you help Mo?
Small businesses are the lifeblood of a strong, resilient local economy, and they did not have strong foundations before this crisis. The government had stripped away a lot of the support that people could get. Rents were rising so high in London. We've done lots of work in the London Assembly trying to work towards defining a working rent for small businesses. It's so important that we build back with supporting people to start more small businesses as well. One of the policies I'm most proud of in my manifesto is the idea of creating a form of basic income which is called a creative autonomy allowance, allowing young people in London to have a basic income, to allow them to start new businesses, start new creative careers like Mo has got there, and make sure that people feel like they've got the security and the backing of London to rebuild by creating more small businesses. We've got a genuine vision for how we can transform our economy into something that's much more resilient, much more based on small businesses. And I think people are willing across London to work with us on putting that together.
OK. Mo, did you want to come back in and say something there?
A lot of the reliefs that are available are plagued by bureaucratic issues. There are eligibility issues. What if elected, what can you do to enhance that process?
OK, Luisa Porritt, can you take that one?
Well, thank you, Mo, for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. There are too many barriers for small businesses, and the Mayor can do two things. One, they can use their own powers to support you, but two, they can also be an advocate to government to make sure that you get the support that you need. And it's Liberal Democrats in Parliament who have been arguing that small businesses like yours need proper compensation for the impact that the pandemic has had on businesses like yours when it's been no fault of the business themselves. So covering things like those rent costs and staff costs despite furlough, which didn't fully cover the costs that many businesses have incurred.
You're going to need government support and agreement on that, though, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and I will be a strong voice calling for that. But I've also got a plan for what I would do myself as Mayor, and that includes a plan to reinvent our high streets, making sure that they are fit for the future, providing more of the services that local communities want and need to breathe life into our economy. And also, I mentioned my London Apprenticeships Hub. That would be to help businesses like yours to navigate some of the barriers there currently are for small businesses trying to access government schemes like the apprenticeship levy and the Kickstart scheme. I'd have a dedicated team at City Hall helping businesses like yours to make sure you can employ more people.
We are going to move on to our next panellist, who is Suzanne Sullivan, who's a black cab driver from West London. Suzanne, what's your question?
Hi, so I've been a London cabbie for 9 years now, and I've seen London become increasingly congested, especially over the last couple of years, where low traffic neighbourhoods are popping up all over the boroughs of London. What is your vision to make our London working again?
Let's start with you, Shaun.
We do need a plan to keep London moving, and we have to be cutting traffic overall. And so I'm going to set what the current Mayor doesn't have, which is an overall target to reduce the traffic on the roads. And I'll bring in a comprehensive plan to achieve that, using as much smarter method of charging for driving on the roads than the current congestion charge and the ultra-low emission zone. We absolutely need...
So is that a road pricing policy?
It's a per mile by emissions. It has to be privacy friendly and have smart levers, like encouraging people to drive at different times of the day. I've pushed the current Mayor to do this day in, day out for 5 years now, and he's refused even to commission a study. But we do need something smarter. We need something that's going to work and be fair to people like Suzanne. At the moment, we have a scheme where you pay once and you drive around for the whole day. That isn't really fair to everybody. It's not very effective and it's not smart. We need something that's actually going to work. I want to bring down carbon emissions to 0 by 2030 using the Mayor's powers alone. This is within the Mayor's powers, and yet the current Mayor hasn't moved on it at all.
OK. Sadiq Khan, do you want to answer that? Why haven't you considered smart pricing?
What's really important is we don't replace one health crisis, the COVID health crisis, with another one, toxic air, caused by pollution from vehicles. And so I'm in favour of, and I support the government's plans for active travel, and I support those councils that work with us for active travel. That's why, for example, we've had school streets in our city, we've had 20 miles per hour in our city, but also we've increased fivefold the amount of cycling taking place in our city. We've got finite road space, and if you've got Londoners jumping back in their cars, that will lead to gridlock. And you're experiencing that because at the moment, people, not unreasonably, are a bit nervous about going on public transport, and that's why we've got to encourage them to use public transport when it's safe to do so, and it is, and to walk and cycle. The alternative is everyone jumping back in the car. And I'll tell you this, over the last 5 years I've been mayor, we've managed to reduce the toxic air in the heart of our city by half. We can be zero carbon by 2030. We can invest in a green future without the need for all of us relying on our car, to leave our streets for people like you, professional drivers who need the main roads to get from A to B.
You are extending the ULEZ to the North and South Circular in October, and that will bring around 4 million residents into the zone. But can I ask, does it feel fair to force people to scrap their cars or hike up their costs when we're in the middle of a pandemic?
Let me do that. So one of the conditions the government wanted to attach to our support was for me to extend the congestion charge to the North Circular and South Circular. I said no, because I'm standing up for London. Compare and contrast Shaun Bailey in the pocket of the government. I said no, so the C charge hasn't been extended, but I'm unashamedly going to be extending the ultra-low emission zone up to the North Circular and the South Circular. Why? Because I want the rest of London to benefit from the progress we've seen in the heart of London. In the heart of London, a 50% reduction in toxic air. I want all of London to benefit. I've got a diesel scrappage scheme, helping the poorest families, helping the charities, and helping others. And we've supported more than 8,000 individuals across our city. I'm saying to the government, give us more support so we can help more Londoners. And by the way, who suffers the worst quality air? The poorest Londoners. This, for me, is an issue of social justice.
OK. Shaun Bailey.
If you want to make the air in London better, if you want to do it without charging Londoners, so we've seen a rise in the congestion charge, we've seen a rise in council tax, what you should do is green the entire bus fleet. I'll green the entire bus fleet. That's the equivalent of taking 1.1 million cars off the road. I'll give black cab drivers an extra £6,000 interest-free loan so they can adopt the new cab more quickly. That's the equivalent of taking another million cars off the road. What we've seen here with the mayor is a complete failure to bring people on the journey of making London green. Londoners will not get involved in that. If every time they hear the word green, it comes with a new tax bill. We have to bring people with us. And when you do it with a bus fleet, when you do it with the cab fleet, you support all of London because those buses are everywhere. There's many other measures we can do as well. But the most important thing is, I see my son, he's asthmatic. I watched that boy cough. I see my mother do it as well. She had to lock down early because of her asthma. We've got to get on top of this. And the way to do it is not to punish Londoners' wallets. The way to do it is to use our collective money to green the bus fleet.
So why are you against cycling? Why are you against cyclists?
Here's the deal. The mayor has made it a war between cyclists and drivers.
No.
It doesn't need to be that way. We need balance on the streets of London.
Sure,
I've been cycling.
Admit you're anti-cyclist.
I've been cycling since the age of 10. Anybody who knows me who's watching this now will know that I used to race.
Why do you not pull out our cycle lanes?
It's got nothing to do with that.
Shaun, I think we need to share the history. In the last 5 years, Shaun and I will agree.
Wait, I just want to hear from
Shaun and I will agree.
Suzanne is who I want to hear from. Suzanne.
He's rewriting history.
First of all, the low traffic neighbourhood, you've cut all the roads where they're very affluent areas, and you've put all the traffic onto the trunk roads of London, where are many poorer people living, many residents living on the main trunks of London. You've also, when you talk about the cycle lanes, no one wants to stop cyclists going around London, but you've reduced road traffic, making pollution even worse to accommodate cyclists instead of all people travelling around London. We are a working city and we need to travel around London.
OK, Suzanne,
let Shaun and I respond to those 3 points.
Let Sadiq Khan answer that.
Well, firstly, Shaun and I need to just remind viewers that Shaun Bailey is rewriting history. That is the opposite of what he's been saying for the last 5 years in the Assembly, as Shaun and I will testify.
What I actually want to say was that Shaun was going to repeat history, because one of the first things that Boris Johnson did when he came in as mayor in 2008 was cancel the first of the toxicity charges that I'd spent years as a campaigner trying to get in. And that means that we're now 10 years behind achieving the clean air targets that needed to protect
Can I just say, because everybody's speaking
and now
about
he's your Prime Minister, Shaun. How can we trust you when you're standing?
And by the way, Riz, Shaun Bailey is the guy that voted against the ultra-low emission zone in 2019 we brought in, voted against our support for those who are walking and cycling, voted against for financial support for school streets for 20 miles per hour, voted against budgets to help small businesses who are really struggling, voted against my budget to support black black cab drivers in the conversion from diesel taxis, polluted and poisonous, to electric taxis.
Isn't it interesting that the mayor's very busy putting words in my mouth? We should be interrogating your 5 years of failure. Let me just speak to Shaun. Shaun's much bigger. Shaun, you are correct.
You do want to go backwards.
No, Shaun, I'm agreeing, you are correct. I do want to not expand the ultra-low emission zone to in and out of London. For many communities, it's a worship tax. For other communities, it's cutting them off from their local hospital. I think there's a much fairer way to do it, by greening the entire bus fleet. How can you charge the poorest Londoners to pay for the richest Londoners to drive around? It simply isn't fair. And when we talk about LTNs, you should only give an LTN to a community that wants it. Most of the LTNs that don't work, the community said it wouldn't work and nobody listened to them.
So are you saying that you would scrap LTNs, which are low traffic neighbourhoods?
No, what I'm saying is I would only give an LTN to a community that wanted
it. Well, here's the thing,
Riz. If you go to Redbridge, if you go to Dulwich, all these people say we don't want that LTN.
Riz. If you're applying the job to be the mayor, it's worth knowing what the rules are. The mayor is not in charge of LTNs. Councils are. It's a basic noddy guide to how to be the mayor.
Where does the money come from? The mayor has to approve the money that council
spends. No, it comes from the government. Shaun Bailey's applying to be the mayor.
Let us hear from Luisa Porritt. Luisa Porritt, you heard from Suzanne there.
Yes, thank you. So I think we need to help Londoners to go green. Londoners like yourself, Suzanne, it's costly for you to change your vehicle. So the mayor should be supporting that, and the government as well, frankly. Electrifying the bus fleet has been brought up. I want to make sure that we're ambitious about that it's done by 2028. That will make a big difference to cleaning up our air, because so many Londoners travel around by bus and only 4% of our fleet is currently electric. That's shameful. Furthermore, there is currently a £2 billion project. It's the mayor's dirty little secret, the Silvertown Tunnel. It's a new road tunnel that will add more cars to our roads, so it won't help with congestion that you're currently experiencing. And that money could be used instead to invest in public transport projects that have been put on ice, which would give Londoners more options so that they wouldn't have to get in their car all the time. We could invest in things like extending the Bakerloo line instead, or making sure that Crossrail 2 goes ahead.
Sadiq Khan, it does sound like a contradiction when you're saying we need to clean up the air. You're going to build a massive new road tunnel. Well,
anybody who's been to South East London will see the congestion caused by the Victorian Blackwall Tunnel. On average, it closes down 700 times a year. A 5-minute closure leads to a 3-mile tailback. So it's not £2 billion worth of taxpayers' money. It's a tunnel that will have a lane guaranteed reserved for a double-decker bus, more than 30 buses an hour, and the tolls that those using the Blackwall Tunnel and Silver Tunnel pay for the tunnel. And by the way, there'll be free travel from one side to the other, those who are cycling, those who are pedestrian. It'll improve congestion, it'll improve the quality of air.
No, if you build another road, it will add more cars to the road.
For those in South East London, it's the only way to ameliorate congestion in that part of London and to improve
we know that building new roads does generate more traffic. Sadiq Khan here is in danger of repeating the mistakes of Ken Livingstone, who wanted to build a motorway bridge in that same location. That was scrapped, and the Silvertown Tunnel needs to be scrapped as well. I'd do that on day one.
We are talking about the environment, so I would like to bring in Stephen Yates from Stockwell here, because, Stephen, I know that the environment is a big issue for you.
What's important is to make it accessible and encourage more people to be able to cycle. So I know there are cycle lanes now, and I appreciate what Suzanne's saying. It can be a bit difficult for a taxi driver to navigate that. But I do think we need more, because it can be a scary place cycling around London, and that does put people off. But if there are cycle lanes, it's more accessible. So I think for me, it is just reducing the carbon footprint, mainly from domestic vehicles, and kind of making more green versions of public transport, including taxis. How would they create an innovative and greener London of the future?
In one line, which I know is ambitious, can you deliver on that in one line? Sadiq Khan.
Look, the only candidate that can beat Shaun Bailey at the election is me. I've been a Green Mayor over the last 5 years. We've increased 5-fold the amount of cycle lanes. It's seen the air quality in our city improve hugely. I want to build on that progress, not just by rolling out the ultra-low emission zone to North and South Circular, but more cycling safely for people in London. I don't want to replace one health crisis, COVID, with another one, toxic air. I got asthma as an adult training for the marathon in 2014. I feel it every day. That's why it's important for us all to work hard so we avoid children having stunted lungs forever, adults with health issues from asthma to cancer to disease. This is a crisis that needs solving. It's really important we're the generation that solves it rather than the last generation that doesn't get it.
That's a very long one line, but thank you. Luisa Porritt.
So one of the things I would do is make the Santander cycle hire scheme free every Sunday for Londoners, which would encourage Londoners to get into that healthy habit of cycling and also get more people back into the centre of London to enjoy our museums and galleries. But I'd also scrap the Mayor's £2 billion polluting Silvertown Tunnel because it's the wrong direction when we need to be cleaning up our air. I'm an asthmatic because of the pollution in London, and it's unacceptable to consign the next generation to a worse fate.
Shaun Bailey.
I'll try to be brief, give you three things. Firstly, we should be using the Green Highway, which is the Thames, to take traffic off the road, particularly HGV. One barge removes 50 lorries from the road. We are building a large tunnel underneath the Thames. They're doing it. It definitely works. Number two, I've talked about greening the bus fleet. That is very important because you're cycling behind that bus. So let's make sure that it isn't spewing things into your face. And when we talk about the roads of London, we have to make sure that LTNs are put in places where they're useful, not where they add to the traffic, because it's creating a wall between cyclists and everybody else. It doesn't need to be that way. Many cyclists like myself cycle, drive and walk. Let's encourage more people to cycle. If you come to my community, nobody cycles. Why? Because where the cycle lanes are, how they're built don't appeal to us and not for us. Let's make more quiet ways. Let's give people more access to cycling and then they will become cyclists.
OK. Shaun Berry, one line.
I said before we needed a comprehensive transport plan, and that's what I bring. So alongside fairer ways of charging for driving, I'd bring down the fares on public transport in outer London. We'd have one zone under a Green Mayor, and I'd triple the cycling budget. It's so important that we make these other ways of getting around safer and more attractive and cheaper as well. Getting safety on the roads right is really important. So if you really want a Green Mayor who will do all of this and who has this plan that will make us the first city in the world to get to zero carbon transport, you actually have to vote for a real Green Mayor. OK, thank you, all four of you.
OK, lots and lots to take in, lots to think about ahead of May the 6th. For now, though, let's finish as we started with our panel of undecided voters, and we want them to describe in a few words your vision for this city over the next few years. Christian, first to you.
I would like a safer London where young people don't have to worry about getting stabbed or serious youth violence coming their way. I'd love for there to be more opportunities and investment in the next generation of young people who will become our future leaders.
OK, thank you. Zoe, to you.
I want police to be trained to recognize and take seriously all forms of abuse and coercion, and better funded victim services that serve all women, including refugees. Overall, our mindset needs to radically change. We must treat gender-based violence and rape culture as serious threats to London's safety.
Thank you. And Mo?
So I would love to see initiatives, specifically grants, forms of support that would prevent risks of closure of businesses, further staff reductions, or long-term financial fragility. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mo. Pascal?
I'd like to see a reduction in the waiting lists in London, and I'd like to see homes built for families, large families. I'd like to see an end to overcrowding. And I'd love for my children to be able to grow up in the city that we love, which is London.
OK, and over to you, Suzanne, your vision for this city over the next few years.
OK, so I would love to see London open up its roads again and to become greener by making electric vehicles more affordable and for the infrastructure to be supported by it.
OK, and finally, Stephen, to you.
I'd like to be able to step out of my house and breathe clean, safe air in London. And I'd like London to go carbon zero, but as a priority, not as an afterthought. And I'd like it to be a really inspirational city for other cities in the world to follow.
OK. Thank you, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it. And of course, to our candidates here, let me just remind you, this is the full list of mayoral candidates standing. You can watch interviews with all of them on the BBC London website. And of course, thanks to you for watching. It'll be Londoners who will decide who leads this city for the next few years. From all of us here, Take care. Bye-bye.